Kevin Agati.
Now that we got that out of the way, this morning we now know it is not all New York or nothing for Carmelo, as he's indicated he is open to some new scenery.
Yes, he is, Lindsay. Developing story this morning. Our Adrian Wojnarowski reporting Carmelo open to waiving his no-trade clause to join the Houston Rockets or Cleveland Cavaliers. All contingent, of course, to those teams being able to come up with a deal the Knicks would like. Houston has been pursuing possible trade scenarios with James Harden and the addition of Chris Paul. Cleveland, of course, has LeBron James. One reason Melo was looking at those two contenders may be his lack of postseason success. He has the third highest scoring average in NBA history among players who never reached the NBA Finals. In the same company as George Gervin, Dominique Wilkins, and Pistol Pete Maravich. The furthest he's gotten is the 2009 Western Conference Finals with the Nuggets. That was against the Lakers, guys.
Thank you, Jay Harris. So for more now on this story, we bring in NBA reporter Chris Haynes. So, Chris, when you're looking at the Cavs and the Rockets, which of those two is best suited to make a deal if we're talking assets?
If we're talking assets and we're talking trades in particular, then I think it's Cleveland. It's been well documented over the last year. Cleveland has been trying to unload Kevin Love for Carmelo Anthony. I think at the end of the day, if that deal is still on the table, which I'm told they're still open, that can be had. Houston is trying to get rid of Ryan Anderson. He has 3 years left on his deal, worth $60 million. Adrian Wojnarowski pointed that out. But New York Knicks, with the new regime, the current regime that's in it right now, it's going to change over the offseason. They're not willing to take on a guy like that. They're trying to get into the rebuilding mode, bring in young guys and assets. So if you're talking about somebody who's going to help and bring back value in return for Carmelo, Kevin Love seems like the next best
Does that upgrade the Cavs?
Well, let me tell you this. That's a good question. You know, it's like when rookies come into the league. There's always that intrigue about a rookie. It's the unknown. I think the Cavaliers feel with Kevin Love, especially with the way Golden State is equipped over there, bringing back virtually everybody, they feel like they know their ceiling with Kevin Love and how they stack up with the Golden State Warriors. With Carmelo Anthony into the fold, it's the unknown. It's that, okay, we can get to that point, but it's that intrigue of not knowing what your ceiling is. I think they feel like they have a pretty good gauge on where they stand as constructed now.
We also can't ignore the relationship that LeBron James has with Carmelo Anthony, the idea of playing together, and you're bringing that offensive scoring there. It's interesting, though, if we do talk about a scenario where the Cavaliers are making a trade with the Knicks, and you look at who's pulling the trigger, because we do not have permanent GMs in the position at both places here. Is there a timetable on moving Melo?
Well, we were always told that there was a possibility that Carmelo could relocate during this offseason. So this is something that can happen at any moment, regardless who's there in the front office. But it is kind of interesting to see that Carmelo is willing to get out now that there seems like the dysfunction is already out the window in Phil Jackson. So, but I think Chris Paul in Houston kind of changed that too. That gave him another option. Before it was just Cleveland being the next path to being able to contend for a title. Now he has two options. But I think when you're looking at that loaded Western Conference, the great migration out west, I think if he was to go to Cleveland, that is a clear path for him to meet what everybody thinks will probably be the Warriors again in the finals.
That is a great point. You stay in the East and you have a shot right now, the way things are looking. Chris is going to be back during the 9 o'clock hour for much more around the NBA.
And one of those discussions that we're going to be talking about is Paul Millsap, who's come a long way from his initial contract as the 47th overall pick with the Jazz. He didn't crack $10 million a year until his current deal with the Hawks, but this new contract, according to reports, Paul George joining Russell Westbrook was just one of the moves that shocked us this offseason so far. And now Carmelo Anthony is open to an NBA existence outside of New York, as long as it's Cleveland or Houston. And after meeting with Houston, Andre Iguodala has decided he is staying put with the NBA's favorite super team. And the Cavaliers, they still don't have a GM. Those just some of the headlines from the past couple days. It has been a crazy week thus far in the NBA. Max Bredos takes a look back.
Lots going on in the association. Let's recap the craziness of the NBA in the past week, shall we? Russell Westbrook secured his first MVP with a moving speech to boot.
I couldn't be able to do none of this without you guys. My road dog. You're my role model.
His Airness Michael Jordan even had something to say to Russ.
The ceiling is the roof. Let's make it happen.
James Harden may not have won the MVP, but the Rockets did land CP3 in H-Town. James, your thoughts? Paul George is headed from Indy to OKC. How do you feel about that, Russ?
That's pretty interesting.
Jimmy Butler opened up in Minnesota.
My phone's in my back pocket right now, 773-899-6071.
Butler even had time for FaceTime. Phil Jackson and the Knicks have parted ways, and Jackson was on the first bus out of town. Steph Curry signed the biggest deal in NBA history. 5 years, $201 million. J.J. Redick is on his way to Philly, and Joel Embiid took to Twitter to remind us to trust the process. Rudy Gobert, Isaiah Thomas, and Hassan Whiteside all made their pitches to Gordon Hayward over social media. But we still don't know where Hayward will land, at least for now.
Some big players making some big numbers,
Yeah.
right? Cashing in. Big figures being handed out in the NBA offseason. We're going to give you our best big numbers. 3 players from last year's Eastern Conference All-Star team are heading to the West. Jimmy Butler, Paul George, and now Paul Millsap to the Nuggets. 13 of the top 14 players in ESPN's NBA rank are now out west, Kev.
Yeah, the NBA offseason undefeated. Steph Curry struck gold over the weekend. There are maxes and then super maxes. How about a 5-year deal worth over $200 million? That figure of $40 million per makes him the highest paid player, not just in the association, but in all 4 major professional sports in America.
Kev, he's hardly alone, though. There have been 4 deals handed out in the last 48 hours that average at least $30 million per year. That matches the total in NBA history entering this free agency. This year's recipients, Blake Griffin, Kyle Lowry, Paul Millsap, and Steph Curry. For no more, let's welcome in NBA analyst Antonio Davis. All right, my man, we learned overnight Carmelo Anthony open to waiving his no-trade clause to go to the Rockets or the Cavaliers. Which team do you see being a better fit for Melo's talents?
You know, right now, when you look at these teams and what they're trying to do, and they're obviously trying to win a championship, I'm going to send them to Houston. I just feel like in Houston, with the way that they move the ball and shoot the ball, and there's not a lot of defense being played anyway, Melo fits right in. You can move him to that 4 spot. Now you have he and Ryan Anderson who can go out there, stretch the floor, still defensively play the way that you need them to play. And I think Melo's just at this place now where, you know, he's ready to win, get into the playoffs and have an opportunity to win a championship. So with him, CP3, I mean, you're going to need some more basketball sooner or later. But Mike D'Antoni, that's never been a problem. They've been able to share the ball.
It's intriguing, Melo and D'Antoni.
Exactly. That's the first thing I thought about.
Exactly.
That's very interesting.
All right, let's talk about the biggest free agent still on the board here, and that is Gordon Hayward. Max mentioned he doesn't get all the hype. Put up very similar numbers to 2 other players at his position that just moved this past week. The headliners, Jimmy Butler and Paul George, all were all-stars last season, averaging over 20 points per, shot well from 3. And you could also say they've all 3 drawn interest from the Celtics. When you watch this kid's game, what stands out from Gordon Hayward?
The biggest thing for me is just his upside, first of all. This is a kid that came into the league averaging 5 points a game, is now averaging 20 points a game. He's gotten better each and every year. In this game of having small forwards who can score the basketball, like those guys you just showed, he's in the upper echelon of those guys. He can knock down a 3, he can get to the basket, he's working on his mid-range game, and he was on a team that got to the playoffs, and he was an integral part of that team. So it shows that not only does his numbers show that, he's going to consistently get better, has great body and great size, and that's what every team needs at this particular point in time. If the Clippers would have had a guy like this the last 3 or 4 years, it would have been a different story in L.A.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
Yes.
And you mentioned he took that team, you know, the playoffs in the West.
In the West.
The idea you put him in Boston or you put him in Miami in the East?
Yes. And then with all those guys going west, I think I'm heading east.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
I'm going to find a way to.
You said Melo would be better suited for Houston. Yeah. If you put him on that team, they beat the Warriors?
You know, I think there's a chance, you know, because of the only thing that they were missing is the quality of shots that they were getting. Melo, to me, still is able to bring high-quality shots. He's going to get enough shots for sure, but now you got another guy who's in that space where if we get to the playoffs in a big game, maybe we have another guy who can knock down a shot or two.
I'm watching. I'm watching who has the ball late.
It's going to be fun.
CP3, the Beard, or a guy like Melo, if they're all together.
Hey, you put it in the Beard's hand, you let him get to the basket, but he has several options. You can't help.
Yes.
So now you're talking a different story.
Antonio, thank you so much.
Thank you.
In 5-3. Yeah, we got 2 more hours of this. 5. Lee Zarniak, Jay Harris, Kevin Agati with you. It's 8 o'clock on the East Coast.
Oh, is it really? Tim Kirkchin is going to join us in about 10 minutes with more on the MLB All-Star rosters, including one notable difference between Aaron Judge and Jose Altuve.
But we're going to begin with our top story this morning involving Carmelo Anthony's future. Yes. Our Adrian Wojnarowski reporting Carmelo open to waiving his no-trade clause to join the Houston Rockets or the Cleveland Cavaliers. All contingent, of course, to those teams being able to come up with a deal the Knicks would like. Houston's been pursuing possible trade scenarios with James Harden and the addition of Chris Paul. Cleveland, of course, has LeBron James. LeBron James. One reason Melo is looking at those two contenders may be his lack of postseason success. He has the 3rd highest scoring average in NBA history among players who never reached the NBA Finals. In the same company as George Gervin, Dominique Wilkins, and Pistol Pete Maravich. The furthest he's gotten is the 2009 Western Conference Finals when he was with the Nuggets. That was against the Lakers. Lindsay.
Thanks, Jay Harris. We're thankful to have our insider, Tom Penn, here. He came skipping in.
Good morning.
Good energy. Good morning to you. Okay, so.
Mellow Monday, huh?
Very good.
Huh?
How do the Rockets make this happen? We know they've already acquired Chris Paul, so how could they, asset-based, go ahead and lock this up with Carmelo Anthony?
Tricky to see because, well, we know Melo has a no-trade clause. He'll waive the no-trade clause. The next thing he has is a 15% trade kicker. That means more money for Melo. So he can get 15% of the remaining 53 or 54 million, whatever it is he has on his deal. That complicates things. Now, he can waive part of that to make the deal work. So back to the Rockets. What do they have to give up? They're not going to give up. So they're over the cap, right?
Right.
So if they're going to bring on his mid-20s to upper 30s with a trade kicker deal, they're going to have to give up about that much money. So you start talking about Ryan Anderson at $20 million. You start talking about Eric Gordon at $12 million. Do they aggregate some of those guys to make it work? And is that what the Knicks want back, right? That's the next question. So it's not easy by any means. And then he's got to go play for a coach he's got some experience with.
And it's interesting. He's owed $54 million over the next 2 seasons.
Yeah.
So how do they make that work with the cap?
That's what I was talking about. The Rockets have to give up just about as much money as they take in.
Right.
So if they're going to bring in Melo's 26, and let's say he waives his trade kicker, they have to give up at least 20, 22, 23, and you start looking at Ryan Anderson as the first guy to go because he makes about 20. Is that exciting enough for the Knicks? And the Rockets don't have any draft picks to give up because they already gave a pick to the Clippers to get Chris Paul. So you'd have to wait for the Rockets' 2020 draft pick. And look, if I'm the Knicks, I want an asset back that complements Porzingis. I'm doing every decision based on Kristaps Porzingis and how it creates complementary talent to grow up with him. And I don't know that Anderson does that.
I think the other interesting thing is Carmelo's history with Mike D'Antoni.
Yeah.
So what do you know about that and about Melo's willingness and desire to be back with him after things didn't end so well between the two?
Didn't go well there. They had a rough go of it.
Right.
Melo is a different character when he's the main character. When you put him on an all-star team, he behaves differently. USA basketball, he plays differently. He falls more in line. Then he's just the major league scorer that you need him to be. He's not everything. The problem with Carmelo is if you need him to be everything, your best player, your leader, doesn't quite work. We've seen what happens. So I think Mike D'Antoni in a system with a really strong Chris Paul and with the almost co-MVP James Harden, Melo would fall in line with those two guys and be one of 3. And then you get a good version of Carmelo.
Okay, so then you think D'Antoni doesn't become an issue in terms of the relationship between the two of them?
I think it's a lot easier for Mike D'Antoni to put him more in a USA basketball mode than in a lead dog mode from an NBA team.
Tom Penn, thank you. Always